So, big takeaway from today. Angular 1.5 is the future of web apps. What I probably meant to say was that components are the future of web apps. You build your apps using a component-based architecture. My thesis for today is that there are actually 3 different roles that components can play in any application. So let's look at each of them in turn. Presentation components, or sometimes called dumb components, or maybe even pure components, which means that they don't actually modify the state of the application themselves. They don't care where the data comes from, it's given to them, they then do stuff with the user, interacting with the user, and then they will emit some kind of output, like an event or something, to say that something has happened. But they don't know what the application is going to do with those events. Business components are like the glue between this presentation layer and your real business logic, which might be housed in an Angular application as services, say. These guys really do know where the data's coming from. They're responsible for going and getting it and then binding it to the presentational components. They're sometimes called smart components. I kind of think of them as impure because they do make state changes to the application. In Redux, they're called container components. And then finally, this is probably the most contentious role, which I haven't seen written about anywhere, but when I've been thinking about components in my applications, this kind of role keeps coming back. And these are view components, which are specialized versions of business components. So they do know about data, but in particular, they know about the router, or they know about how to dynamically create this tree of components. And I think this is actually a really useful idea to consider. What's Angular 1.5 got to say about this? We've been focusing our efforts a lot on trying to close the conceptual gap between Angular 1 and Angular 2. So in Angular 1.5, we made it easier to define components, to create instances of them, and to test them. So we decided to create this component definition helper, which, using sensible defaults, allows you to create your components with almost like no boilerplate at all. So we've got this component that we can define easily, but they need to interact with the world around them. And there are 3 ways, basically, that you can interact from your component. So I've got a component here. It's got a parent component that contains it. It's got a sibling directive, like, might have like an ng model or something. And then it wants to talk to a service. But in Angular 1.5, or in components, we automatically bind these to the controller for you, which is nice. We also expose the controller directly onto the template using $CTRL. So immediately you have access to your bound inputs and outputs on the template. And what you'll see in all of these examples so far, I've not actually referenced scope at all. And dare I say it, but we've almost killed scope. And the last thing I want you to go away with today is to remember that web apps love components, and components love Angular 1.5. Thank you very much for your time today.